Hello, this is Parker Briesbois, Parker Thomas Briesbois, first of his name. And once again, you are watching the Iridescent. We're here live and or pre-recorded for a new decade, or whatever you call 10 episodes worth of the Iridescent. We are here at the 21st one finally, and we've made substantial gains in subscribers and view time and all those juicy YouTube metrics. And I want to shout everybody out for getting me this far. It's not that far, but slow and steady, baby. We're going to win this race. Today's art installation is our first in a series of live art. This is a tricolor Aussie Shepherd, and his name is Odin. Odin is not my dog, but I am his dog uncle. We're roommates. He's being a very good boy right now, as he generally is. But that's only because I've got delicious food bribery in my hand here. Interesting thing about Odin is he's got a fancy boot right here, as he shows you, right? This normal, beautiful tricolor represents a society where we often live divided along racial lines, but all on the same canvas of one beautiful animal. But we don't see as much mixing as we would like to. Odin is a living symbol of that, and it's a grim burden that he bears with great dignity. As you can see, he's got great poise and concentration, and for lasting this long, he gets one little treat. Oh, pooch. Being a dog uncle truly is the most privileged role one can have in proximity of such a beautiful, good boy like this, because you are bereft of all the responsibility of making sure he doesn't die. But you do get to hang out with him almost as much as the real dog parents do. One of only like 3 people who spend a live audience, huh? Odin. Huh? Odin. What a name, huh? Odin. Let's break down that name, huh? Let's break down Odin. Odin is the Norse god of wisdom and war. He's the MacDaddy god, right? Featured in a lot of pagan pantheons. Doesn't really match the personality profile of this one, but here in Yellow Headband Studios, we've been watching, hey, Odin, a lot of Netflix, coming out of quarantine and stuff. And one of the favorites from that was a show called Norseman, which I highly recommend. It's a spoof of the History Channel's dramatized Game of Thrones wannabe called Vikings. It's done by a Scandinavian studio where they take a look into the real lives of the infamous Viking raiders that came from the Scandinavian peninsula in the first millennia after the death of our Lord Jesus God Christy. And at that point, he hadn't come to the Scandinavian peninsula, so they were still worshipping gods like Odin. Odin. How to make a Norse god disappear. As a dog uncle, you only get partial visiting rights. You don't get him whenever you want. So if dog parents want to go get coffee or something and walk their dog, it doesn't matter if you're recording. That's just the terms of contract. It'd be what it is. Odin was, depending on what you worship. I don't know what the first church of the Norse Pantheon looks like anymore, but Odin was a war god. He was a patriarchy god. He was the MacDaddy, father of most of the gods, and if you asked any Viking theologian of the time, he would be the champion of all that is good and just in their mind, which probably was pretty different than the good and just we think of today because, well, they were raiders and pillagers and stuff. Nonetheless, that god Odin shared a lot of characteristics of other cultures' patriarch god, their primarch sky daddy, like Zeus or Ra, or even the Judeo-Christian god is pretty patriarchal. They're gods that venerate strength, loyalty to them specifically, some more than others, but also a disturbing amount of over-the-top self-sacrifice, Think, Jesus on the cross or whatever. Zeus maybe not so much, but thinking about Odin specifically, one of the myths of Odin was that he literally hung himself from a tree for like 7 days as a sacrifice to himself, or something to that effect. It's a pretty weird story. Lots of Norse myth is weird stories. One time Loki turned himself into a female horse so that he could have sex with the greatest stallion of all the land, so that he could give birth to a horse with lots of legs that some other god, probably Thor, could ride. Pagan mythologies are absolutely bizarre. Kind of interesting. It's a shame they're not more mainstream, because maybe I'd be more religious, because they're a little more entertaining. Too much bestiality for my comfort, though. But I always find that it's interesting how those pantheons, basically the world over, I know I'm mostly just looking at Europe, they had it in Egypt too, which is northern Africa, and the Fertile Crescent, in Iraq area, they had male patriarchal gods, as recounted in like the Tales of Gilgamesh and all that stuff. But basically all these pantheons all around the world in fairly recent ancient history, within the last 3,000 years or so, venerated above all else a male head of their pantheon. I don't think that's how it's always been, because I remember way back when I was a sophomore in high school, I had a art history course. It covered some super pre-ancient art, some basically like Paleolithic, Stone Age statues and cave paintings and things of that nature. Just briefly, kind of the intro course. But one of them that I remember was the Venus of Willendorf, and I'll attach a link to that. But basically, it's a statue of a just absolutely rotund woman, looked pregnant, supple breasts, thick thighs, kind of a bulbous head, but it was basically just the image of a fertile woman, a pregnant woman. And it was an idol, and most historians think that it was an object of worship, some kind of totem, some sort of symbolic representation of the thing that whatever people were living there revered above all else, Because early humans didn't have a whole lot to do when they weren't sleeping, struggling for food, fucking to survive, and running from predators. So whatever artistic endeavors that they were able to undertake at that time often had attached to them an additional weighty symbolic or spiritual meaning. That is to say, they didn't waste their time with hobbies. It wasn't, I just whittled a kitty cat into a bar of soap because I like kitty cats. Or I didn't just paint a space marine because I like to play board games that have space marines. No, they didn't have time for that bullshit. So whenever they did take the time to carve something out of rock, you better believe that it was a big deal for their dumb caveman ass. But that suggests to me, and I'm just an amateur anthropologist here, is that at that time, the thing that humans were attaching greater spiritual value to was fertility, the ability to bring more humans into the world, which is kind of just a spiritual, psychedelic attachment to a very animal instinct, right? From the time we first got stoned on mushrooms or burning grass or whatever got apes looking up at the stars, we've attached spiritual elements to very basic animal instincts, very simple mammalian traits, like caring about our young, wanting to reproduce so that our species will carry on. And the smarter we got and the more sophisticated we got, we just dressed those things up more and more and more. So at the time when the Venus of Willendorf was carved, this was long before there were civilizations that worshipped the MacDaddy gods of the Fertile Crescent, Egypt, Greece, Norway, wherever else there were MacDaddy gods, which was probably a lot of places. So what changed? That's a question for historians, but my speculation, and this is a very speculative episode here, is that we stopped worshiping a female god, a goddess of fertility, because Mother Earth, Gaia, fertility, mothers, protection, family, crops, well, not crops, but growing things. We stopped worshiping those things when the human species invented agriculture. So Enlil, Enlil, was the Sumerian god of air and storms, and he was also the chief god of Sumer, which is the oldest civilization we basically have record of. The Sumerians were located in the Fertile Crescent, modern-day Iraq, and they had agriculture. I think that transition was probably made once agriculture became a thing and our priorities as a species changed. And it was still survival-based, but rather than being hunter-gatherers who lived in caves, who were basically just concerned with getting enough food, sleeping enough, finding a safe enough place to birth more humans, that became less of an issue for us because we had a steady food source. And once we had a steady food source, we could build structures around a steady food source. And once we had structures built, it was easier to protect ourselves from predators or whatever. And we started to be able to control our own destiny a little bit. And it became about holding valuable areas. Now, in a lot of myths, there's this classic conception of the earth as female. Things grow out of the earth, much like things grow out of a woman, but that doesn't happen unless there's seed coming from the sky in the form of rain, right? Which is why you see a lot of these male gods being associated with things that come out of the sky, like Zeus or Enlil, gods of rain, and storms and things like that, or Ra, or whatever the Egyptian god's name is, associated with the sun, right? They're also warlike and controlling and jealous. And that's because they reflect, like most of our gods since time immemorial have reflected elements of our nature as humans, they reflect the more dangerous elements of masculinity that at that time were far more useful. So once you controlled a fertile part of a valley where you could, have agriculture and build up huts around it to collect that food and feed all your people, once that system gets going and you're good with the gods and the rains are coming and the earth stays fertile, it becomes much more about protecting that from other people who would want that. We see it today. There are humans that are more security-brained than others, right? And that security brain is often associated with more hyper-masculine, toxic masculine, whatever, like domineering traits, right? You can maintain security if you maintain and control. So we projected those values onto the gods we worshipped as a priority once fertility became more taken for granted because we already knew how to inseminate the earth with agriculture and irrigation and things of that nature. So it's all just abstract parallels. Gods are deities. They're all just abstract parallels to what humans are doing at any given fucking moment. My pet theory that we went away from mother goddesses, fertility goddesses, earth goddesses, largely when we invented agriculture, or in a more modern term, capital. Something you could use to produce value for yourself. Because that agriculture, that capital, became the end-all be-all to survival. If you didn't have it, you lost your livelihood, you weren't able to protect it, then you weren't able to live. But if you could protect it, then it would basically just take care of itself and take care of you. Yeah, maybe there's some tending to it, but that's secondary to protecting it. So the female role of fertility and reproduction and propagation and life-giving on a pantheon level is subjugated by whoever's controlling it, calling the shots, and taking care of it. Civilization took off from there. It's not like we ever backtracked away from agriculture. Agriculture still happens today. And once we had agriculture, and we didn't need all hands on deck like hunter-gatherers did, just getting food and having babies, we had farmers, and we had people controlling the farmers. And then once we didn't need as many farmers, we had people who could specialize in making containers for the shit that we got out of the farm. So they started becoming pot makers or something, or I don't know. And then we need people who make equipment that make farming better. And then we need people to repair that. And once you got those professions building up, creating capital, other capital related to the other kind of capital, you get your society that ultimately turns into the one we have today, where we have people who make that light, who make my headband, who make this microphone and the computer you're using to watch this right now. Somewhere in all that milieu, you get people who aren't that good at using their hands to make a bunch of shit, but they are better with their words, and they're better with their art, and they're better with their thoughts. So they become the artists and the priests and the philosophers who basically entertain the people who are farming and making pots and shit, and the rulers, and in turn probably propagating some kind of myths, right? So it's a pretty sweet gig there in whatever part of the Fertile Crescent that Sumer started in, right? People are getting fed. There's a guy who made some laws and protects us from other people who want to get our shit. It's a pretty sweet gig. And it's all because Enlil wants it this way, and he keeps, knocking up whatever mother goddess, and they have some kids who do some wacky adventures. And the people you hear all this from are the priest class, who are continuing to project everything they see around them into a mythology that validates that tribe, that proto-society's existence, right? And because everything grew out of such systems, how could we ever get away from those origins, right? Because we still have patriarchal religions. Name me a mainstream religion that exists today that venerates a female entity. Because weirdly enough, all the gods, all the superhuman divine energies are masculine. Certainly their avatars are, in terms of messiahs and shit. And we don't, worship them for inseminating the earth with green grass and pastures and shit anymore. Sure, it's more obscure stuff like assuaging existential angst by saving our sins as long as we follow them or whatever. But weirdly enough, they're all male. They're all very explicitly male. That's kind of curious, but I think that's just a natural progression from that initial switch from hunter-gatherer to agriculture and the spirituality associated with those two very different types of humans. When that transition happened, it was permanent, and everything that came after it was a growth out of that seed of patriarchal paganism, right? And I think because it came from the desire and the veneration of the ability to defend capital, it basically contributed, because everything's intersectional, right, to negative symptoms we see today in capitalism. You see a degradation of the earth. We don't really care that much about hurting earth. We're willing to sacrifice her literal body that we grew out of in order to make a buck, because capital's where it's at. It's been where it's at since Sumer. Maybe people think I'm psychoanalyzing too broadly here, but because we're more simple than we think we are, we do tend to inherit the associations, the abstract symbolic associations of our forefathers. And that's obvious in the fact that we call it Mother Earth, right? But because we don't care about Mother Earth for capitalism's sake, then we don't care about, implicitly, we don't care about the abstract female as much as we do the driven, ravenous, productive, domineering male engines of a system like capitalism that's just more than willing to exploit the natural resources of the more passive, bountiful, regenerative Earth, right? We take that shit for granted. And what does that sound like in a really abstracted kind of way? It sounds like misogyny, or at least a warrant for misogyny. And with misogyny, you get anti-feminism. And I think that comes from worshipping sky gods and MacDaddy gods like Odin. Can we ever get away from this model? I think so. Where does it start? Probably education reform. It all starts with how we teach our young. Is this generation and the generation before us broken? Well, maybe you could argue we're not, but the generation before us certainly is. I personally think we're fucked too, but I don't think humans forever will be doomed to such a thing. If we can survive a couple more centuries, we could flip this bitch on its head. We could re-find a new veneration for our earthly mother, you know? Maybe we could fucking go so far as to like break down the implicit gendering of both these things, but I have a feeling it's going to take a little longer to even do that. We can barely accept that not all humans don't prescribe to one gender or the other, let alone things that are bigger than humans, right? Because we're anthrocentric. Everything's got to be on our terms. Male, female is the classic biological terms we use for these things. But if we reform our education, how we teach our young to think about these things, then maybe we'll have a chance to fix it or reverse the course or modify it in a way that's more sustainable. And that's where I think the liberal arts curriculum has failed us. We, as a country, have broadly accepted this idea, not just our country, I know they do it in Canada too, and probably a lot of countries all over the place, but we've accepted this idea that if we give an individual child enough knowledge, we will equip them with what they need to be a successful, industrious individual out into the world once they leave the education system. I think where that's failing is it's bad faith because we don't equip children with the same tools. We don't equip all children with the same tools. And I think we're equipping them with the wrong stuff, frankly, if we look at the reality that we're in 2020. How are we going to face the existential threats we have as a species when everybody just grew up going to public school or private school and learning trigonometry when they had no aptitude for it, didn't give a fuck about it, knew they weren't going to need it later in life, and as a result just didn't apply themselves. And when they got out of there, they don't know how to do their fucking taxes. They don't know what their voting rights are. They don't know how to make anything vaguely nutritious for themselves. So what I think is you ditch the education system as it exists right now. You start first and foremost with epistemology, the theory of fucking knowledge. And for those of you who went to high schools with an IB course, you're probably thinking, no, it's an advanced kids course, so we can't. Not everybody can learn that shit. But all epistemology is teaching people how to know how they know things and understand what knowledge is, what verifiable truths are, insofar as humans can access them, and opinions are. And you look at 2020, and you look at everything that's preventing us from addressing the shit that we need addressed, racial strife, economic inequality, climate change that's literally going to cause us to all burn up or drown in the heat death. And we can't even fucking agree that any of these things are happening. And why is that? It's because nobody knows how to tell truth from fiction anymore. So I think you get epistemology in there right away. Teach kids philosophy soon. Then you get a civics course. You teach them how to be functioning fucking citizens, what their rights and responsibilities are in a democracy. You give them practical history as to how they got those rights and what they had to overcome in order to get those. And you teach them how to apply them, how to do their fucking taxes, things of that nature. You also teach them about their local industry, how they're going to make it in this world and how they're going to help their community. You got to know how your fucking community functions if you're going to do that at all. I live in Tacoma right now, the city of Destiny. We've got a giant port. It accounts for an enormous amount of the GDP in this town. People here don't know what the fuck's going on there. And all of our local elections, most of them center around, the most consequential ones, center around issues in the port. If we don't know what's going on there, if we don't know how many jobs are there, what kind of industries are there, then how are we going to meaningfully participate in that? And people don't go out of their way to get learnt about that shit when they're already adults. So teach kids that. Civics, local economy, that's your second period, right? Philosophy is your first. First is philosophy, then it's local economy and civics. Then you teach them a fucking health and life skills class. Depression, anxiety, and suicide among teenagers are way higher than they've ever been since we've started recording that in 2020. Why is that? Well, people don't know how to take care of their own mental health. They also don't know how to be fucking human. I'm not saying let's go back to fucking home ec or anything, but teach kids like what they need to know about maintaining their mental health, maintaining a nutritious diet that they can provide themselves with, how to navigate relationships and, suss out trauma and be more empathetic. Okay. God, what was the fourth one? Oh yeah. The fourth one is just like applied problem solving. So just, more like hands-on stuff, how to solve the puzzles of shit in life, my bathroom's leaking. Well, why is your sink leaking? Oh, well, it's probably this pipe. Okay, well, you can't find anything in the pipe. What else is that? Okay, if you don't know how to get under the house, who do you call for that? Just how to exist, how to function in the real world. And you might think that, how the hell would you make classes out of this? How do you make a 6-month semester out of just problem solving, like how to fix a pipe? Well, how the fuck did they make a 6-month long semester out of an English class, which is a language that we all already know? So, and then in terms of sciences and STEM and arts and even like auto shop and shit like that, you make that electives, because obviously the next generation is going to need scientists and engineers and writers and communicators and politicians and leaders of various kinds and mechanics, right? Computer scientists. But the fact of the matter is that not every child is going to be served by getting little bits of that on a broad liberal arts curriculum. And if that's the case, then you're going to have a lot of kids who come out of that shit disillusioned with it, didn't get much out of it, didn't learn basic life skills to apply any of the more advanced knowledge they learned anyway. And as a result, you're going to have a more feckless civilization that is more confused, more fat, more lazy, less empathetic than the one before it. And if that's the case, then we're not going to make it before we look like our phosphine shitting neighbors on Venus, because we're, like I said, we're going to burn up in a fucking nuclear microwave. Anyways, so calming down. I myself am going to go meditate to burn off this steam. Thank you very much for listening. Welcome to the next 10 episodes of fucking Iridescent. I'm so excited to be here. We're going to continue bringing you art, thought projects, headlines, commentary. I know Trump has COVID. I didn't want to talk about that shit. Sports, philosophy, whatever. Send me your suggestions. Subscribe. Tell your friends. Like my videos. Spread the word, people. I really like doing this, and I want to bring you more of me and my thoughts and the iridescent in general. So, thanks for watching. See you next time. Parker Brisebois signing out. Peace!